Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. In 2018, Berlin-based Georgian visual artist Besik Mazmanishvili, exhibited his artwork linked to the separation of Georgia's occupied regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which we name Tskhinvali region, with the Berlin Wall. Entitled 65 Degrees, this installation sheds light on the ongoing Russian occupation in Georgia. With this, he drew a parallel between the Georgian occupation and the Berlin Wall, and a reflection of borders and walls being built in Europe and through the world. He took some real segments of the Berlin Wall, all decorated by original graffiti, and disposed them in order to create what resembles a forest of concrete through which the spectator can walk through. In front of them, he located a tall mirror in which the spectators can reflect themselves fully immersed in the surreal scenario while walking towards it. But once arrived there, the artist asks the spectators to change that perspective and to turn behind the mirror. There, they discover that the mirror is supported and supports a green signpost, forming a 65-degree angle. The signpost says state border and has been dangerously stolen along the so-called border of occupied territories in Tskhinvali region by the artist himself. However, from this side, the perspective of the viewer completely changes. The segments of wall that before were portraying a grisly shadow and a gray atmosphere now look like a disaggregated mass. Indeed, as explained by the artist himself, the essence of 65 degrees is that walls will fall and families will reunite. Artificial borders, walls, and barbed wires, like in the case of Georgia, can be created or imposed on people, but eventually they will be transformed. An installation that speaks 1,000 words. For many Georgians, the Ukraine war recalls the Russian invasion of their own country in 2008. Following that 5-day conflict, Russia recognized 2 Georgian breakaway regions, Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region, and stationed its troops there. In 2008, Russia suddenly declared that it would have no longer recognized the provisions of the declaration of the CIA's Council, the organization formed by countries born after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The declaration, signed in 1996, recognized that Abkhazia and Ossetia, two regions, were part of the Republic of Georgia. The withdrawal reawakened the separatists' movements, and when the Georgian forces acted to maintain peace in the regions, Russia entered Georgian territory in the so-called defense of the minority, starting an ongoing occupation of Georgian territory. Since then, Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, has pushed even more strongly for closer integration with the West via closer ties to the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, even if membership in neither body seemed immediately likely. Russia employed the same strategy to occupy Crimea in 2014. Since the Russian attack on Ukraine, since the attack began on February 24th, popular support for the besieged country has been everywhere to be seen in the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. Ukrainian flags hang on balconies and windows in distant suburbs, as well as by the doors of cafes and shops on downtown avenues. Georgians can feel the agony that a Russian invasion brings, having fought their own war with Russia almost 14 years ago. But many in the country's leadership believe saber-rattling could put Georgia high on Putin's radar, leading to longer-term problems. Hours before Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, a senior Georgian official told civil society representatives that the leadership often has to choose between a bad option and a worse option. And we have to figure out what can be less of a harm in each situation, he said. Unfortunately, this is our reality. Russia can easily, cheaply, and effectively harm Georgian stability by leveraging its influence in the breakaway regions whose pursuit of self-rule Moscow champions and where its troops are already stationed, within a few hundred meters of a major highway linking Tbilisi to Georgia's Black Sea coast, and in close proximity to the Baku-Tbilisi-Supsa pipeline. The line of separation in this area seems to be creeping steadily forward into the Georgian government-held areas, and there may be little Georgians can do about it. We have to also always take into consideration that it's a very difficult region on its own, even before all the wars. There are a lot of conflicts going on in the Caucasus. And the possible spillover of conflicts from neighboring countries is a threat to Georgia. The conflicts in the Caucasus negatively affect the security of the whole region and represent potential sources of humanitarian crisis. At the same time, the Russian Federation is attempting to demonize Georgia among the population of the North Caucasus region of the Russian Federation. The lack of control over the Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions of Georgia, which border the Russian Federation, breeds conditions favorable to transnational criminals and further impedes the effective fight against transnational crime. Another challenge in the continuing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The renewal of military confrontation between these two states always weakens the security of all three South Caucasian nations and increases Russia's political influence over the entire region. But despite the government's hesitance, its divisions with the Kremlin are increasingly on display. On 28 February, the National Bank of Georgia said it would act in accordance with the international resolutions and standards and cannot and will not help evading implementing the sanctions. Georgia supported all UN General Assembly resolutions condemning the Russian attack, the suspension of Russia's membership in the Council of Europe, and the launch of the International Criminal Court's probe into alleged war crimes in Ukraine. On March 3rd, Georgia, along with Moldova, followed Ukraine's lead in filing a formal application for EU membership. And just to give you a brief history of Georgia-EU relations before or leading to the application, in 2009, Georgia joined the Eastern Partnership Initiative that was launched at the Prague Summit. 2012, the negotiations on the deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement between the EU and Georgia were officially launched. 2014, the EU-Georgia Association Agreement, including the DCFTA, was signed in Brussels. 2017, visa-free travel with the EU came into force. And then at the 8th Eastern Partnership Foreign Ministerial meeting was held in Luxembourg, and the next meeting was held in Tbilisi. 2021, the Georgian Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Mr. Kuleba, and their Moldovan counterpart signed in Kiev the Mutual Understanding Memorandum of the respective foreign ministers of the three EU associated states, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. So the associated trio was born. On March 3rd, as I already mentioned, Georgia filed the EU membership application. And in June, according to the decision made by the European Council, Georgia was granted European perspective. But it still needs to fulfill a 12-point requirement plan. Well, just to give you a brief, just to explain a little bit about the national security concept of Georgia. Here's the preamble of the Constitution of Georgia. It says, "It is the strong will of the citizens of Georgia to establish democratic order, economic freedom, a social state governed by the rule of law to ensure universal human rights and freedoms, and to strengthen state independence and peaceful coexistence with other nations. The national interests of Georgia are ensuring sovereignty and territorial integrity, developing state institutions and strengthening democracy, development of an efficient national security system, strengthening national unity and civil consent, European and Euro-Atlantic integration, securing stable long-term economic growth, ensuring energy security, ensuring regional stability, strengthening the transit role of Georgia, ensuring the environmental security of Georgia and the region, ensuring civil integration and maintaining national and cultural uniqueness, strengthening cybersecurity, demographic security, relations with the diaspora. And here are the threats, risks, and challenges. Occupation of Georgian territories by the Russian Federation and terrorist acts organized by the Russian Federation from the occupied territories. Environmental damage. The risk of renewed military aggression from Russia. Violation of the rights of internally displaced persons and refugees from the occupied territories. The ethnic cleansing in the early 90s and 2008 resulted in the expulsion of approximately 80% of the residents of these territories from their homes, a total of approximately 500,000 individuals, about 261,000 of whom presently reside in the unoccupied part of Georgia. The violation of the fundamental rights of the individuals forcibly evicted from the occupied territories is a serious challenge for Georgia. It is an important priority for Georgia to protect the rights of these people, including their right to live and own property in the occupied territories. International terrorism and transnational organized crime is a threat. Economic and social challenges, energy challenges, strengthening energy independence is important for every country today, but for the national security of Georgia especially. For this purpose, it is crucial to diversify sources of energy. The further development of clean energy sources and the creation of required infrastructure is also important to the energy security of Georgia. Cyber threats, environmental challenges, demographic challenges, challenges to civic integration, destruction or damage of cultural heritage monuments. And this is especially difficult to control in the occupied territories because there are a lot of churches and other cultural UNESCO sites that are currently not under our supervision. I would like to speak a little bit about our relations to Germany. The diplomatic relations between Georgia and the Federal Republic of Germany were established or re-established in 1992. And when I say re-established, it is because at the beginning of the 20th century, when Georgia was independent for the very brief 3 years, Germany was the first country to support its independence. The Federal Republic of Germany was the first state to open its embassy in Tbilisi in 1992. And in 1993, the embassy of Georgia was opened in Germany. The Georgian-German relations are at the interstate level are connected with a period of the Georgian Democratic Republic that I just mentioned from 1918 to 1921. Since Georgia regained its independence and established diplomatic relations with Germany, the cooperation has been intensively developing in political, defense and security, trade and economic, environment and energy, police and law enforcement, science, culture and educational fields. The bilateral partnership is further bolstered by interagency cooperation that also develops dynamically. Georgia and Germany actively cooperate within international organizations as well. The political dialogue between the two countries further deepened by launching Georgian, German, French trilateral consultations between the foreign ministers of the three countries. Around 50 agreements are enforced between Georgia and Germany, encompassing such areas as promotion and protection of investments, avoidance of double taxation or income and capital, technical and financial cooperation, defense, fight against organized crime and terrorism, etc. And I'm especially proud to have been part of the group or the commission that was working on the agreement in the field of culture and education between Georgia and Germany, which was signed this September at the Foreign Office of Germany. Georgia regularly participates in various international exhibitions held in Germany. Georgia will be an official host country at the ITB Berlin, the world's leading travel trade show in 2023, so next year. Georgia had a very prominent, very important participation at Frankfurt's book fair in 2018 as a guest of honor, and this was a very important boost for the publishing business and for Georgian writers being discovered in Europe. The Georgian-German cooperation is marked by diversity in the fields of education, science, and culture, as I told you, promoted by the events already organized and planned, both in Georgia and Germany. The implemented and ongoing projects like Days of Georgian Culture in Berlin, Georgian-German Scientific Forum, music, film, and other types of festivals, concerts, exhibitions, etc. And I will be returning to this at the end. And I mentioned the Georgian-German Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation and Culture, which I am part of, that resulted in the signing of the agreement in September. Through the support of Germany, dual education programs in agriculture and hospitality sectors have been launched. In the context of the close, friendly, and multi-dimensional relations established between Georgia and Germany, it is important that Georgia-Germany Year was officially launched in 2017 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of founding German settlements in Georgia and the 25th anniversary of diplomatic relations. So this was 5 years ago. And the final stage of the Georgia-Germany Year in October, as I mentioned, Georgia participated as the guest of honor in the Frankfurt International Book Fair. And we celebrate 30 years of re-establishing of Georgian-German diplomatic relations this year. On this occasion, a cultural agreement between the two countries was already signed during a ministerial meeting on September 13th, and the Prime Minister held a meeting with Chancellor Scholz here in Berlin on September 14th. The role of Germany during the past 3 decades has been of great importance for the formation of Georgian civil society and for cultural as well as scientific exchange. One can think of numerous scientists, authors, artists, sportsmen, politicians, diplomats, and thinkers who, after studying in Germany, contributed to the development of the country and laid important milestones in German-Georgian relations. None of this would have been possible without the walls coming down, and we're surely hoping that the walls and barbed wires in Georgia will soon come down. In this context, 3 Georgians, Europeans, German-based women will present a diverse program on November 29th at the Concert House in Berlin. Nino Haratischvili is a very famous and prize-winning writer from Georgia who lives in Berlin. She will read from her novel, The Lack of Light, which traces the friendship of 4 women against the backdrop of Georgia's recent history. And Lisa Batiashvili, who is a very famous violinist, will be performing this evening as well with myself. I'm a pianist, as you heard. So we will hopefully enchant the audience with a repertoire ranging from Georgian compositions to classics by Bach and Brahms and some film music. So a little bit to our relationship with the Ukraine, and then I will be very happy to answer any questions you might have. Georgia is determined to make the utmost of the potential of strategic partnership with Ukraine. Ukraine, growing in its role as a democratic and peaceful state, will contribute to regional stability and security in Europe. We believe in this. Georgia and Ukraine cooperate in foreign and national security policy, not only on a bilateral level, but also in such multilateral contexts as the UN, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, and the GUAM. Cooperation with Ukraine in the Euro-Atlantic integration process is important. Georgia also, of course, welcomed Ukraine's participation in the EU's Eastern Partnership and, of course, its application for the EU. So, thank you very much, and I hope that we will all be here and we will experience the walls coming down in Georgia and all of Europe and all the world. Thank you very much.
We try to have as much discussion and interaction as possible. As always, if you could please raise your hand if you'd like to make a question or a comment, and then make your way to the microphone so that we can all hear you and we have it for the recording. Who would like to go first? Okay, Professor Bruckner. Okay, and there's a microphone next to the video camera.
Good afternoon. My name is Uli Brückner. I'm a European Studies professor at Stanford in Berlin. Thank you very much for the excellent overview and also your commitment to European integration. I have two questions. The one is, if a country joins the European Union, then it's not so much a question of interstate collaboration, although this is how it appears as an international treaty, but we all become citizens of a hybrid special beast called the European Union, which is more than an international organization and less than a state. Do these future citizens of the European Union feel European? Because that's a question for the cultural attaché, yes, who is closer to the citizens than to what states do. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is a variation of, was it John F. Kennedy who asked, what can you do for your country and not what your country can do for you? So when we ask what the European Union can do to help Georgia to flourish, then everyone can easily say something. But what do you tell Europeans what we get once Georgia is in? Because of course it also comes with a number of risks and challenges, and solidarity is also something that affects especially countries with net payer positions and so on. So these are the two questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Starting by the first question, do we feel European, and how do the citizens of Georgia identify themselves, and why do they identify themselves as European? Well, Georgia has even thousands of years ago, it was part of the Hellenistic culture, and starting with the myths of Medea, which played on the coast of Georgia to the Black Sea. So she was a Georgian from the Greek mythology, and the idea of Europe was born from the Greek mythology, with Europa being one of the main characters. So even since that time, Georgia has always been part of the more Western civilization, identified always and became one of the earliest Christian countries in the 4th century, and was part of many wars to defend the Christian religion and the European values, and it was always on the crossroads and was invaded by many countries on the way to Europe. So it was always, even before being part of the European Union, it was one of the first defenders of Europe. So a lot of men have fallen to protect the European values. They have already contributed a lot, and it is, to go over to the second question, it's still going on because Georgian soldiers are fighting along. It's the largest non-NATO country contributing to many NATO operations. And so it's maybe not European, but Euro-Atlantic. So Georgian soldiers have fought alongside Europeans, and especially they were very active at saving German soldiers when the German base was attacked at what was the Sharif? Yeah. So. And then there is, of course, Georgian culture. There is Georgian wine, not to be neglected and forgotten. And, you know, the Georgian mentality, everyone who's been there will confirm that Georgia has always been not very Soviet. Even during Soviet times, it was the freer spot of Soviet Union. It was sort of like Italy of Soviet Union, with good music, very good wine. I mentioned it maybe a little too often. So I think we do have a lot to offer. And especially in the field of culture, we have a lot to offer. And we just feel, we've always felt European. We feel European, and we will feel European in the future. So it doesn't even depend on being part of the European Union as a federation or not.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Okay, maybe I'll throw a question on there too. I'd love to hear from you as a cultural diplomat a few success stories where cultural diplomacy has actually achieved, something transcending a border, changing someone's perspective. And I think there, either as a pianist, as a cultural attaché, one or two sort of success stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, one that I really like to talk about and that I really enjoyed, and one that is tangible because it was just a few years ago, was the Frankfurt Book Fair that I mentioned. It is a huge platform, and when we think of a book fair, it's not just literature. It is a platform, and it's also not only in Frankfurt, but all over Germany and the German-speaking countries. So it covers Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Germany, and it gives you a platform to organize, of course, literary events, to sell the licenses for publishers and book authors to meet new audiences. But through literature, you can bring Georgia closer to Europe. You can tell Europe the story of families, of real persons who experienced Russian occupation, who experienced everything that has been going in the news history of Georgia. You can bring closer the music of Georgia, because a lot of concerts were organized, a lot of exhibitions, visual artists, movie screenings. This all was happening. We had almost 150 events throughout the year. So every other day, something in Germany was going on and dedicated to Georgia. And you could really feel it, because everybody, before that, if I met a person, a random person would say, "Oh, you're from Georgia. Yeah, I remember, let me see, Stalin and Shevardnadze." And after the book fair, people suddenly spoke about Georgian literature, about Georgian music, about the mountains in Georgia and the beauty of the country, the food of the country, the people, the hospitality. And this, again, led to Georgia being invited to be the guest of honor for the International Tourism Fair, which is going to be, hopefully, and already is, a boost for tourism business. So this is how, with culture, you can support your country becoming stronger economically. And of course, stability plays a very major role in all of this. So let's pray and hope that it will stay stable. So.
Thank you. And maybe this is a follow-up question. Again, a difficult question to answer, but I'd be curious to get your perspectives. Cultural diplomacy in Russia. In the sense now, of course, is a very difficult time to imagine sending a ballet troupe to Moscow to perform, Georgian ballet. On the other hand, I was thinking, some of you were here a few weeks ago. We had a conference also at the European Commission, and it wasn't actually Professor Berkner, but Professor Strautenschulden, the former director of the European Academy, who gave an interesting analogy. He was talking about the creation of the European Union in Germany. And he said, just imagine you're sitting at home, you turn on the TV, and you see a boxing match comes on the screen. It's in the middle of the boxing match, and you see the two boxers hugging. And you think, they love each other, this is love. But in reality, those of you who know boxing, very often that's a technique. You hold the other person close so that they can't hit you. And that was the analogy he used for Germany and the European Union. They wanted to take Germany, hold it, so that Germany couldn't punch it anymore. And I'm wondering, what do you do with Russia? Initially, the war started. In some countries, they were boycotting and saying, okay, no Russian dancers, no Russian, which is crazy, just to somehow, block an entire culture. Is there a way that, like in a boxing match, we could somehow, use cultural diplomacy to give a big hug and say, look, stop us, Russia? Or is it, is there no chance that we have to kind of wait until the hard power situation is over and only then? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've tried it. We've tried everything. We've tried hugging and everything, but didn't work for us. But since 2008, I know many colleagues of mine, and I can confirm definitely for myself that I have been invited to perform in Russia on many occasions, and I have refused. I don't think that this should be standard and that it should be that everybody or every artist has to be forced to do so. I think it's an individual decision that everybody has to make for themselves. But this was how I felt, and I did not want to be entertaining the country that is occupying my country. So, but I have a festival in Georgia, a piano festival, and I have invited Russian pianists to perform. These are personalities or persons that have expressed their anger over Putin's regime openly. These are persons who have condemned the invasion of the Ukraine and the aggressive war against the Ukraine and in Ukraine, on the territory of Ukraine. So, if they are artists, then we do speak the language of music, and that's a language that does not need translation, or I don't think that we have to boycott everybody. It's just not right, and it can lead. We have to remember from history. So. As to people relations, Georgia is facing a huge challenge right now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, because we share a border with Russia, which means huge amounts of refugees who are not happy with the regime, who are forced to join the military, have to flee somewhere. And one of the first options, if not the first, I'm not sure about the statistics, but I think one of the first options is Georgia. So we have had huge amounts of people crossing the border. They have to wait for days to walk over the border. 30, 40 kilometer long queues to just cross the border. And it's just so sad to remember and to think of the times where it was the Georgian refugees who had to flee from the northern parts to occupied territories of Georgia some years ago because of the Russians. And now it's the Russians who have to flee because of the Russians. So I think it's the politics that has to change. And we don't want a destroyed Russia. Nobody wants that. We want a strong, democratic, Russia with the right European values. But if Mr. Well, it's not even an if. Mr. Putin is not able to provide that for his country. So as long as he is in power, I'm sure there is going to be more and more people coming to Georgia. And there are mixed feelings, because of course there are persons who really are running away from all of this. But how are you going to control who has which motive? Especially the military mobilization that was announced in Russia now does not include all males. It includes only those who have already have an experience and who have served. And they are more dangerous. So you cannot say no to refugees when they are in need. On the other hand, being a very small country, already with 2 regions that are where Russian troops are stationed, and taking so many refugees is a threat. It's a ticking bomb.
That's come because I think one opportunity for culture diplomacy is also sometimes to differentiate between, let's say, the politics and the people. I know as an American that was sometimes a problem. When George Bush Jr. was in power, when we had the war in Iraq, they actually recommended to Americans to put a Canadian flag on your backpack when you're traveling abroad and tell them you're American. And it's true. I mean, very often, America was Bush, was Iraq, that's it. And everyone is the same. This is a similar situation with Trump. You have to be careful in a public bar, wherever American is here. So I think there, and I was also shocked, as like everyone was, when suddenly people started to block Russian artists and this and that. Where are we living? So I think there, and that's the challenge. Sometimes when you have a government that doesn't necessarily act on with the will of its people, in the fullest sense of the word, how does one deal with that? And there, I don't have the answer, but I think that seems to be a territory where cultural diplomacy somehow should get involved, even though it's dangerous, even though it's difficult, because of the humanitarian problems you were mentioning with the refugees and beyond. But I was just curious to brainstorm with you, because there is no easy answer. If you look at Israel and Palestine, very often there's 2 schools of thought there. One school of thought saying as much diplomacy as you can. The other school of thought saying, no, don't do any diplomacy, because that could normalize the relations, and that could take some of the drama away from the injustices. It's maybe similar here. Do we just block everything Russian until, there's a day after Putin? Do we put a bullet in Putin's head? Or do we try somehow with cultural diplomacy to at least reach out to the people, both within Russia as well as outside of Russia, the big Russian diaspora? And it seems like there's an opportunity there also that maybe even through Russian diaspora or citizens, one could allow other voices to be heard, as opposed to just the one voice.
I agree that cultural diplomacy has much bigger power than people might assume. And, there are wonderful examples of cultural diplomacy. You mentioned the Palestine and the ongoing conflict there. For example, the East Western Divan Orchestra. Daniel Barenboim. It's a wonderful example of coexisting and making music together, traveling, working with the greatest musicians and performing together peacefully on greatest stages of the world. There is another example in Georgia of a youth orchestra that was created for one of the festivals, summer festivals in the wine region of Georgia, and it's called the Pan-Caucasian Orchestra. You do have Armenians and Azeris working together as musicians there. You do have Russians coming to Georgia to join this ensemble, and of course Georgians and some other musicians from some other nations of the Black Sea and the Caucasus. So, yeah, it is very important, and I agree that you have to never stop looking for a peaceful solution.
Thank you. I don't want to dominate the questions. Let's see, we have another hand in the back.
Hello. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. My name is Arif Ammar, and I am a TV news editor for Afghanistan International TV, which is broadcasting from London and Washington, D.C., covering Afghanistan and current affairs around it. And let me pay my gratitude to your country for your troops sending to Afghanistan, and also for all those individuals who lost their lives in Helmand province. Actually, for the general information, after 2016, Georgia contributed the third largest troops contribution after NATO, after US and Germany in Afghanistan, which is remarkable. My question is about how does the media and civil society play in all these cultural diplomacy of Georgia? And could you please a little bit elaborate about the landscape of media and civil society activities inside Georgia, and how do you compare that to your neighboring Caucasian countries in the south? Thank you.
Thank you. So if I understood the question correctly, you want me to elaborate on how the media plans the cultural events inside Georgia or outside Georgia?
Inside Georgia, freedom of speech.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, of course, it's one of the challenges. And we're working a lot. There's a lot of NGOs and to support the freedom of journalists. And well, right now, the situation I would evaluate as very good, because there is definitely freedom of speech, and you have even, we talked about the Frankfurt Book Fair, and it was something that was financed by the state, and you had writers who would come on stage and they would condemn the government, and they would be totally and openly oppositional, which I think proves that it's a democracy. Of course, there are some fields where we have to still work on it, but democracy is an ongoing process. It's not something that you will achieve and then you have it forever. Even in Germany, you have to have the civil education, political education in schools. It starts very early. And the Ministry of Education of Georgia is working very closely with the US, with the US aid program, with Germany. We've just had a German delegation of the Ministry of Education visiting there. The political foundations and think tanks that are present there from the whole world. You have the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, you have the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, you have all the major players there, and of course they have a lot of a variety of programs for students to speak up, to learn about the dialogue culture, about the culture inside parties, the culture of negotiation, to learn that their voice matters, to come and to express their voice openly, and to they very often organize media events also for young or emerging journalists, or they bring journalists from all over the world. They have this press trips to Georgia, and then the very experienced journalists work with the younger ones in journalism schools or universities. So, yeah, we're on the way. It's a young democracy. It's a young country. We have been ruled by the Soviets for far too long. So we are on the right track. We still have problems, and it's no use denying it, of course. But we are on the right track, and we're working on it.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Cyril from the Philippines. I would just like to pick your brain, your personal thoughts, both as a diplomat and as an artist. How impactful do you think is cultural diplomacy in terms of your work, personally as a diplomat and as a cultural actor, I would say, because you're both a pianist and a diplomat, so you combine your career in terms of cultural diplomacy. And if you could also answer, could you actually quantify these kinds of impacts of cultural diplomacy, what the results of your, so far as your career is concerned, especially for some of us here? I think some of us are looking forward to a career in cultural diplomacy as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to give examples always. So, one example of me working as a cultural diplomat and promoting the culture of my country and a pianist in one was during the pandemic. when I was invited by the TV channel Arte, which is a cultural French-German TV station, I was invited to perform with a very famous violinist, Daniel Hope, who lives here in Berlin. And he came up with this idea of inviting different famous and lesser famous musicians to his home and to different interesting venues, because concerts were with the present public were forbidden at that time. So he came up with this idea, and he invited me, and we had a talk where we talked about the repertoire. And of course, there are some popular pieces that everybody wants to hear, and then lesser popular ones that you want to promote. But then I asked him whether I could play a Georgian piece, and also if he would be open to explore Georgian classical music. And he had never in his life performed Georgian music before, and we only had 3 days, so it was super quick. I didn't even have arrangements for the violin for some of the pieces, but he's a wonderful, one of the greatest musicians of our time. So I sent him an arrangement that was done for the cello, and he transcribed it for the violin, and we played Georgian music. And you cannot imagine how many positive responses it got in Georgia. It was broadcast. Of course, Arte broadcast it. It was broadcast in all the European countries, and people were writing to us for the duration of a month after that and thanking us. And then they will discover, it was music, it was excerpts from films. So they were discovering films after that. They were discovering different composers and Georgian culture. So that's one example of how you can combine the two professions to do music and good for your country. So that's one. And to quantify, I'm not sure it's possible. No, I mean, I'm very, very bad with numbers. So whenever it goes with statistics and what it brings for the country. One example that I already mentioned was that through the book fair, the next step that came was the International Tourism Fair, which is a huge platform for a country to present its potential. So maybe this is something tangible.
Thank you. I like the way you said about the responses.
Yeah.
That's how you quantify it.
Yeah, there was a lot of responses. I didn't count, but it was, each one of them was warming my heart.
Additional questions or comments? We still have some time. The ambassador has an advocate, please.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm a student of ICD, and I come from Russia. And I'm part of community which is volunteering organization Demokratia. And on behalf of liberal community of Russia, I just wanted to express my gratitude to Georgia for keeping the borders open, because Georgia gave home to many Russians who are against the war, and it saved a lot of journalists and people who try to oppose the regime from getting in prison, from killed or being killed. So it's a very generous step from Georgia, I think. Also taking into consideration that Russia occupied Georgia in 2008. And also I would like to ask, do you think the reaction of international community on Russian occupation of Georgia in 2008 was sufficient enough? Because, for example, now there's a lot of sanctions against Russia, and now everybody expressed their opinion that they're against Russian invasion, but I think it wasn't the case 2008 when Russia put their troops in Georgian side.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was the war of August, the 5-day war in August of 2008, when Russian troops came or invaded Georgia. And the occupation is still going on, and it's a creeping occupation. You wouldn't believe. Not a week goes by where something doesn't happen at the border. Another house or a family finds themselves waking up to not Georgian-controlled territory. It's just awful. It's really creeping. So As for welcoming Russians who have to leave Russia, I know that it's a big tragedy for you, and I can't say that I can relate, no, but as I said, we have had family who had to leave their houses. So maybe the victimization of Russia should not soften anybody's hearts, I'm sorry, but of course, everybody who opposes the war and Putin is welcome in Georgia, and I think this is the right way. But as I said, there are challenges because there are other people coming in as well. So it's not an easy situation, and there is no easy way out of it. And I'm sure that we will be experiencing results of this in the future. So maybe you can help your neighboring countries in the fight against this regime.
I have another question. I see you as a fellow practitioner of cultural diplomacy, so I'll ask you another cultural diplomacy question. With the students in the semester, we always look at examples of successful cultural diplomacy, also failed cultural diplomacy, and I always try to explain to students cultural diplomacy is not always good. It can also be bad. It depends who's doing it and also what are the intentions. And I was curious in your time, whether it's as a pianist or a cultural diplomat, as you look at Georgia under Soviet control and now, do you have any examples where cultural diplomacy was also bad, or it had some sort of negative intention or negative results? Because sometimes it's not always good to bring people together.
I know, yeah. Well, no, not in my experience. At least I can't think of it quickly. Maybe it will come to my mind later, and then I can write to you. But I haven't experienced it yet. No.
Because there, one example I gave with the students also is before the Second World War, Adolf Hitler hated jazz. It was a known fact. He was really not a fan of it. However, once he saw the success and popularity of jazz, he actually used jazz in some of his propaganda in the later years. Would be a clear example where, someone with bad intentions was trying to use culture. And anyways, I was just curious, as a practitioner in your cultural diplomacy toolkit.
No, never had an encounter with one of those cases, but
Okay, thank you. Another question or comment? We do have one in the back. Here, please.
yes.
Could you come to the microphone also?
Oh, I just wanted to add to that point. I've seen, on the World War II and Nazi occupation, I've seen, I went to an exhibition not long ago where they had board games, board games for little children, where the point was to get rid of the Jews and stuff like that. Even children's toys and things like that.
Yeah.
So they had negative intention and negative results as well, and they're just still a cultural item for children, stuff like that. So I have seen that kind of thing before as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
That reminds me of examples in the Cold War, where you have a question too. No, during the Cold War, where they also had a lot of propaganda at the beginning of the Marshall Plan to sort of convince Europeans about modernization, democracy, this and that. It was interesting. Where actually the State Department also co-funded films with the idea of basically teaching these ideas to European countries, which isn't necessarily a bad, from this point of view looking, but it's interesting to see the power and how sometimes the goal is to manipulate, to convince.
Well, think of it, it's similar, but it has probably a little more to do with the religion. But Russians during the Soviet rule and before during the Russian Empire, when they took over Georgia, they always used the Orthodox Church for that. And they would say, because Catholicism in Georgia was very strong and very present, and not only as a religion, but because of the language of the Mass, the children that grew up in Catholic regions in the south of Georgia, they were brought up with different languages, which gave them a wider education opportunity, and they would very often go to Istanbul, because there was a Georgian academy for Catholics there, and they would learn many languages, and through Istanbul they would go to the Western world. And these Georgians were cut off from the history of Georgia. It was not until the fall of the Soviet Union that many people learned about their existence, and they were scholars. They wrote about Georgia. They would secretly enter Georgia. They would secretly, of course, leave Georgia for that purpose. And they wrote. They were artists. They were very important businessmen. They lived in the whole world, and they really wanted to make changes to Georgia and to free it from the Soviet Union and from the communists. So yeah, it is an example where religion can be used to dominate an opinion and give the impression that, oh, there is a belonging together, and we are Orthodox as well, and those bad the Catholics and that awful Western longing or Western values are dangerous. Yeah, it's similar.
Hello, my name is Eliverta. I come from Albania. Thank you for your speech. I just wanted to say, based on your personal experience that you shared with us about asking one of your colleagues to play piece, like Georgian piece, and you got such great feedback afterwards. It reminded me of, actually, like in 2019, I was working in a chocolate factory, and there were a lot of students from Georgia, and I ended up being friends with 3 of them, and we still keep in touch. And it just came so naturally, this sort of like exchange of culture, them cooking food for me. And I think that the best way for cultural diplomacy to work, or this like exchange of culture, is when it comes really natural, like you are not really trying to impose anything on anyone. Definitely. And it just works. So basically, even though after they went to Georgia, after a month or so, we didn't meet for such a long time, and we still keep in touch. When Corona hit, asking what was going on in Georgia and how the situation was in Albania or in Germany with the situation with the Ukrainian war. And it's really amazing that you kind of cultural diplomacy, it's always there as a hidden element, and when you just think of it, it clicks that it's always part of our life. And you get to make great connections with people. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. People-to-people relations are the core of any friendship between the countries and between the nations. We just have the job to enable those kind of connections through student exchange programs, through meetings, through conferences like this, to make sure that they have the possibility to happen. That's all we can do. We can give the little lift or the little push or the little platform for that. So.
Any other questions or comments? Well then let's take the occasion to express our sincere gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you.